Hello and welcome back to the Aligned Living podcast. And today sparks the beginning of a little subcategory of episodes that I'm going to be doing for at least the first season. And you'll be seeing it in the episode description. So it'll begin with aligned relationships. And I'm going to work through various elements of being in aligned relationships. And today the topic is compromise. Now, the inspiration for this episode is two comments that I have heard more times than I can count, and I need to speak to them and what they often represent. The first one is, no one is perfect. And the second one is some version of relationships are all about compromise, or relationships mean you have to be willing to compromise. Now, on the surface, both of those, or not even on the surface, both of these things are completely and totally true. No one is perfect, and relationships do require compromise. So I agree. And I want to take your mind back to the very, very first episode of this podcast where I talked about what does it take to truly flourish. And one of the elements of truly flourishing is foundations. So when I talk about foundations, I'm thinking about what sits underneath our choices. Because both of those statements, no one is perfect and, relationships are all about compromise, are often used to justify staying in relationships or staying kind of trapped in relationship dynamics that aren't congruent. Now, why does this matter? It matters for lots of reasons, but so many relationships slowly lose their vitality, their connection, their intimacy if they're romantic relationships, not because people don't care, but because one person or even both people have compromised in a way that erodes their inner alignment. And I want that to stop for you because it's no fun for anyone. So in this episode, we're going to talk through three things. The first is the two types of compromise, because it's really important for you to be able to know and begin to feel, if you can't feel it already, to feel the difference between the two of them. The second one is going to be looking at your patterns, so watching for your patterns of compromise, because seeing them is the first step to being able to consciously choose change. And third, I'm going to talk you through how to compromise more effectively. So let's get started. First things first, the two types of compromise. Let's simplify it into inner compromise and outer compromise. Inner compromise is when you trade your alignment, your integrity, your values for, let's say, approval, for peace, for connection, to belong, or just the sheer exhaustion of dealing with someone that's so difficult to have a conversation with that you just kind of go, all right, and just give up. So, and other reasons as well. So inner compromise is where you compromise your own congruence, compromise your own alignment. Outer compromise is when you shift logistics, you shift your preferences, you're changing circumstances, but while staying true to yourself. So circumstantial flexibility, but without internal cost. So one of the key questions that I think is really powerful to ask yourself is, like, am I compromising my preferences or am I compromising me? And I want you to really notice if you're using something like no one's perfect or, relationships are all about compromise to justify something that's actually misaligned for you, or to try and find this mental gymnastics kind of way of accepting what's actually unacceptable to your own values or your own priorities or your own congruence. When we compromise our own alignment, there will be feedback, even if you're really used to doing it. There will be a shrinking or a contraction or kind of a lackluster feeling. It's very different to our congruence, when we're aligned, body, heart, mind, and soul, all saying yes. But when we're compromising in the outer, we're compromising our preference, it's just circumstances that shift. And that's the place of, give and take. That's what's actually meant when people say relationships are about compromise. It's meant to be about, well, Chinese is my favorite restaurant and Italian's yours. Let's take it in turns. That's compromise, that kind of thing. So let me give you some examples. Let's say one example of inner compromise or compromising your own congruence would be going along with parenting approaches that contradict your own values. So let's imagine in a relationship, someone's got this really fear-based, punishment-based style of parenting where if your children don't snap to and do exactly what you say at the right time, well, that means they're disrespectful, or that means you don't have discipline, or blah, blah, blah. And another person in the relationship values connection-based parenting. So if one person in that situation goes along with a parenting approach that contradicts their own values, that will be inner misalignment. Another example might be something like ignoring financial irresponsibility that does affect you. So if you're in a partnership and someone's overspending or gambling or, avoiding accountability, and you don't address it because you want to avoid the fallout of addressing it. And this is where you don't want to go, oh, no one's perfect. You want to address that inner misalignment and have a more, empowering, respectful more respectful, honest conversations that can actually work to change things. Or if both of you are going to really have different alignment on something really significant, it might be that you're not a great match in that particular situation. Another one might be staying in a work environment that violates your ethics. That will be an inner misalignment, and it kind of doesn't matter how you dress it up on the outside, how you justify it. You will feel that incongruence, and it has long-term consequences being out of alignment with you, which I think I probably touch on every single episode. So the purpose of this is just to introduce you to the idea not all compromise is equal. Some of it is inner. Some of it's about your alignment, your integrity, your values, your congruence, your body, mind, heart, soul in alignment. And the other type of compromise is out there in preferences and circumstances where we can afford to have some flexibility. The second thing that I want to talk to you about today is watching for your patterns, because we want to be able to see them to be able to, pause a moment and invite choice if we want to create any sort of change. So these are some of the patterns that I see. Sometimes people will compromise their alignment just to kind of get a shortcut to a result. So this is the idea where people use, short-term pain, long-term gain. But I find when we choose something in the short term that's out of alignment, it's very unusual for that to create a long-term alignment. But that's a whole nother conversation. Sometimes it can be that it's just too much effort and too much drama to try and actually be heard and understood if we're in a relationship dynamic with someone who isn't actively curious about our perspective and just kind of wants to win or be right. I've had a lot of clients that are just so exhausted, they've just kind of given up on trying to have conversations where their real feelings are heard. Sometimes we can be uncomfortable with how it feels if we disappoint someone. So if we don't agree and we want to go, no, that's not actually something I want to do, and the other person's disappointed, sometimes we can not have a lot of resilience to that feeling. And so if the other if the other person is disappointed, we can kind of fold really instantly just to keep that, what we feel is harmony. But harmony at the moment at the expense of your alignment isn't real harmony, I promise. Sometimes we can be craving, that connection or the belonging or the safety that we feel like we miss if we disagree in the short term, or we we kind of want to say yes when we mean no, or we want to go no when really we secretly want yes, just to try and keep things again sort of harmonized. But it's not really harmonized if you're not being completely true to yourself. So there's some of the patterns that I see, and I do invite you to watch for your patterns when you're in a situation where with any person and you're not necessarily on the same page, just kind of watching for what you tend to do. It doesn't mean what you do is wrong, but we just want to bring curiosity and awareness to it. Because the thing is, we train people, right? From the first moment we meet them, whether it's a job interview or first day at work or first date or first time we meet anyone, we're training people how to treat us, what we'll accept and what we don't. So every single time you say, oh, thanks, I'd love to, but you really don't want to, instead of sharing what's real, it makes perfect sense that that person that you've said that to actually thinks that you love the thing. So I've seen sometimes in relationships where there's been someone that has chosen like constant connection rather than risking conflict. They can have a partner that thinks, oh, they love coming to that sporting event with me and they love Sundays with my family and they love, like, insert all the things. And it might be that the person doesn't really feel that way and their partner has absolutely no idea. So the other part of this that's interesting, and I'm trying to condense kind of 21 years of working with people into a short, snappy and useful episode. So sometimes I pause in my communication. I'm thinking of there's a program I have. It's called the Relationship Reset Coaching Program. And it's where I work with two people over a period of 3 months, but always separately. So I see each person weekly, always separately, because it's much easier to dig into total self-responsibility for our own stuff when there's the other person isn't listening in my experience. And I can't count the number of times I've heard some version of someone say to me, let's say there was a conflict during the week, and someone will say to me, oh, they came to see that I was right. Or, we had a conversation about it and, they realized my idea was the right one. And until I get to talk to the other person in the situation, I would always internally, just based on my experience, be wondering, did they decide that you were correct? Or did they just decide that it wasn't worth the effort of trying to get you to see their perspective? So my suggestion for you on this, in this section of just watching for your patterns, is firstly, listen to the justification voice. So just watch for it. If you're tempted in any situation to just kind of go with what the other person wants instead of sharing your perspective, just watch for how you justify that inside your mind. So it might not be the no one's perfect or relationships are about compromise. You might have your own way of doing it. So just kind of watch for that justification voice and just kind of ask yourself, do I want to perpetuate this pattern? And if you don't catch it at the time, like one of the indicators that you have over-compromised your inner alignment, one of the indicators, and there's many, but one of them will be resentment. So often resentment is these tissue-thin layers of not honouring ourselves that build and build and build into this undeniable feeling of resentment. And I've probably said this in an earlier episode, but when I'm in a discovery call with a potential new client and they're feeling resentful, that excites me because I know now there's energy for change. And through the coaching relationship, I can support them to have completely different conversations with the people that are used to this misaligned version of them, and it pretty much changes everything. So there's that aspect. But maybe you're the other person in the situation. You might be partnered, or you might have a sibling or a co-worker or someone, and you find that you can get people to agree with you after sharing your passion or your logical reasoning or your perspective. So if that's your experience, if your experience in life is that you can get most people to agree with you after explaining however you explain your side of it, my homework suggestion to you would be to ask the people around you, the ones that really matter, ask them something like, hey, how easy am I to communicate with when we've got different perspectives? Or, like, what's your experience of me when we don't agree? But just be open. They might be so wonderfully thrown off balance by the fact that you're asking that they'll actually be honest. So don't jump down their throat if they say something like, "Oh, I disagree because I can't deal with what happens if I don't," or you put me down, or you belittle me, or you decide my thing is to this and yours is the right way, or whatever. But assuming that you want to have more connection and be more of a team rather than remaining dominant, this would be a really interesting and useful question to ask. Now, on to part 3 of this episode, and that is how to compromise effectively. And the step that I really want to share with you, that the big takeaway from this part of the episode is step 1 is being super clear on how you would actually love it to be. So begin with your ultimate alignment, inner and outer. So if you were completely congruent, body, heart, mind, and soul all saying yes, alignment first, then circumstances, preference, priorities out. So the inner and outer compromise, how would you love it to be if it was 100% your way? Begin sharing with whoever you're sharing with, begin your conversation about compromise from there. Because what I have seen more times than I can count over the years is someone who's going into a conversation with, let's say, a partner. Let me give you an example, actually. Let's imagine you've got person A and person B. Person A has this inner aligned yay about international travel, and they really want to spend, let's imagine all the kids have left home and they've got their eye on this $20,000 trip of a lifetime. And person A wants it. Their travel's been on hold for the whole time that they've been, a parent with dependent children. Person A really wants to spend $20,000 on a trip of a lifetime. Person B would rather spend 0 on travel. They're just not interested, really. So person A approaches person B to have the conversation, but they go in knowing that they'd really love that $20,000 trip, but they know person B, they've lived together for ages. They go in knowing that they're not going to agree, that it's going to be a drama. So they've already kind of go in compromised, and they might begin the conversation gently with, let's go on a trip. It'll cost about $10,000. So they're already at the halfway point between $20,000 trip and nothing with their very first suggestion. So they've kind of 50% compromised before they've even shared the idea. Person B has a bit of a grumble. Person A immediately drops to the $8,000 version because they're uncomfortable with the disconnection. So then person B wants to compromise, and let's imagine they're so reasonable. They go, okay, well, $8,000, that's ridiculous, but we'll 50-50 compromise and let's go on a $4,000 holiday. Generally, person B wants accolades for coming all the way across to the $4,000, extravagant over-the-top holiday, and they expect person A to be happy. But they have absolutely no idea how compromised person A was before the conversation even began. So because person A never invited them into the real dream, they kind of began the compromise internally before they spoke. So person A doesn't get the trip of a lifetime. They don't even get out of the country for $4,000. Their need hasn't been met at all, and person B has done this kind of compromise that they're wanting to be, congratulated for, or to be seen as being really reasonable. Now, I use this example because I could use dollars to explain my point, but this pattern I see in so many relationships where someone has compromised kind of way past the midpoint before they even begin. And so every step from, halfway closer to the other person often is filled with resentment and frustration. And often they can kind of blame person B for it. And the solution is learning how, when we're starting this process of compromising our in relationships kind of effectively, we need to begin with firstly our alignment. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, but kind of like know what your deal breakers are, know what your alignment is, be clear on these things, and learn to begin your conversations about compromise from your 100% yes. And it's not saying you've got to come all the way over to my side of things, but at least begin with what you would absolutely love. Because like I said before, we're training people. We're training people how to see us, how to treat us, what to expect from us. So if over a 20-year marriage you had 10 different conversations about a $20,000, holiday, it's not going to be a real shock and, oh my goodness, where's this come from when you have the sixth one or, however many. So when people are new to this, I kind of say to them, look, say something like, look, if it was totally up to me, like if it got to be 100% my way, I'd do it like this. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is, a dictatorship and we have to do it my way, but I'm just sharing this is how it would be if I got to plan it all on my own. And then ask, if you were doing it all on your own, if it was 100% up to you, how would it be? What would you choose? And at least then you're actually seeing each other's aligned starting point. And that is going to change how you have conversations about compromise effectively. And when there isn't a way for both of you to have that inner alignment with the external circumstances and preferences, that's how you come up with things that you don't even get to think about when you're not compromising effectively. It's how in this, let's go back to the travel example, just so we're talking about something tangible. You might end up with person A and person B going, okay, you want to spend $20,000 on a trip of a lifetime, you go for it. Go for it, take a girlfriend, go with someone that's going to love every second of it, and I'm going to spend $20,000 on this thing over here that I really want that you're not interested in at all. Right? Or if we've only got $20,000, you take 10, go on trip of a lifetime with your friend, I'll take 10 and do this. So you get to have this conversation based on what is actually aligned for both of you. And there is a great deal of freedom in that, because we shouldn't really be asking each other to compromise our alignment, because it doesn't bring fresh, alive, respectful, juicy, fabulous energy to relationships. So that is what I wanted to share with you today. These three things: really understanding the difference between inner compromise, your own alignment, and outer compromise when we shift logistics and preferences. Really taking the time to watch for your patterns of compromise so that you can interject a moment, a pause, where you look for the pattern and you might want to start working on some changes. And thirdly, how to have conversations about compromise more effectively by beginning with your own alignment, by beginning with sharing your vision, if it was 100% up to you, how you would do it, so that you can train people to actually know what you would be, unbound, and learn to compromise from there, because then we're building honesty and we're building transparency, and those things are beautiful to have in relationships. And like always, I don't know how often I've said this or if I've said it at all yet, but if you're resonating with what I'm sharing, if you're listening to this and thinking, oh yes, I do compromise too much, or oh yes, I do kind of railroad everyone into agreeing with me and I haven't stopped to learn how to do that differently. If you're resonating with how I'm teaching and you want to know more about working with me one-on-one, please get in touch. There is always a link to my website on, every single episode. You can book in a discovery call with me, absolutely no cost, and we can talk about how I can join Team You and start to create alignment, not just in your conversations about compromise, but in every single part of your life. And I promise, I absolutely promise, you will never regret putting that time into you, because it is a game changer. So that is it from me for today. Thank you so much for listening. I'm really honoured to be here with you, and I look forward to sharing with you next time.